Hello and welcome to another podcast from Odell Technology. Today we're joined by Jeff Bousfield, CEO, and Simon Davis, Chief Commercial Officer from Nonacus Clinical Services.
Hello, my name is Simon Davis. I'm the Chief Commercial Officer at Nonacus. My background is that of healthcare for the last 30 years, spent 20 of which in pharmaceutical companies, primarily in commercial roles, building teams, launching pharmaceutical products to the UK market. And then 10 years ago, I moved to a diagnostic role, and I guess the rationale for that was really getting closer to the patient, and particularly from an oncology perspective, being able to make real impact to patient pathways and improve those. So, and that's brought us to the mission we're working on today with bladder cancer, where we're really able to revolutionise the current pathways for bladder cancer. We're changing what has been an invasive procedure for the last 100 years. The NHS spending something in the region of £100 million a year on an invasive in-hospital procedure, flexible cystoscopy, and we're able to replace that with a simple, non-invasive but highly sensitive urine-based test. So we're excited to revolutionise the bladder cancer pathways and make a real difference for patients with potentially with bladder cancer.
Perfect. Thank you, Simon. And Jeffrey, please introduce yourself.
Hey, I'm Jeff Bousfield. I'm the CEO of Nonacus. And similar to Simon's background, I started in pharmaceuticals about 15 or 16 years ago, held a variety of commercial and finance roles, then moved actually into technology for a while before coming back into diagnostics. And Simon and I both joined Nonacus around about 3 years ago. So the company itself was founded 11 years ago by 200 entrepreneurs in diagnostics called Chris and Lee. And Simon and I both had relationships with the founders beforehand, which is what brought us into this mission. And it's actually off the back of the success that Nonacus had initially during the COVID period, where the company produced the world's first saliva-based PCR COVID test that initially kind of brought the name, I think, both to Simon and myself. And then since we've been brought on board and joined Nonacus to help take the company from strength to strength, particularly in oncology diagnostics, with GALEAS Bladder being our first flagship at-home early cancer detection product.
Okay, excellent. So, gentlemen, what I'll get you to do now, or what I'll ask you is, could you describe the innovation you developed and why was bladder cancer the focus? And talk to me about the impact service it will make on current patient pathways, clinicians, and the healthcare systems.
Sure. Well, so the reason that bladder cancer is such a compelling area to look at first is, firstly, there's a huge patient population, both in the UK and globally, that are affected by bladder cancer. It's not often one of the cancers that's talked about the most in the media and the press necessarily, but we know from research, both here and worldwide, that it is one of the most expensive to treat. So in the UK, you've got around about 20,000 people every year that are diagnosed with bladder cancer. And in terms of the invasive procedure required to actually find it, that's about 330,000 people every single year, just here in the NHS, that are having to have that procedure. So it looked to be quite a natural place for us to look, because you've got this large patient population, you've got an unmet need, because there was no non-invasive way of looking for bladder cancer. And also, health systems worldwide are under financial pressure. They're looking to reduce backlogs. They want to increase the standard of care. And of course, they would like to reduce the amount that they're paying for these tests. So being able to use the underlying platform of technology that Nonacus developed, and initially for NIPT and then for COVID testing, and then move that into oncology, seemed to make sense to start with bladder cancer first. And it was greatly helped, I would add, by the fact that we're based in Birmingham in the UK, which is right in the smack bang in the heart of the country. And the University of Birmingham, which is moments away, has one of the world-leading research centres. So the collaboration for GALEAS Bladder came very naturally out of a combination of work with the university. And so, after well over a decade of research in the university, and then translational research into a product here at Nonacus over the last 4 or 5 years. Now we have a test that is sufficiently refined. We can prove accuracy, greater accuracy in most cases against an invasive procedure, certainly at a lower cost, and of course a patient preference to pee in a cup at home rather than go into hospital for something invasive. It's kind of the right time to roll it out.
Okay. Any further comments?
Yeah, if I could just add a couple of points to that, actually. I guess the first of which is we've seen the NHS plan, and we know that much of that plan is focused on bringing care out of the hospital into the community, moving to a more digitized system, and early cancer detection is a really key focus for the NHS right now. So I think what we've developed, and I think aligned with the NHS, what we're offering here is really really valuable to not just to patients but to the system as well in terms of improvements. We know that of all of those 330,000 referrals that Jeff alluded to, we know that only around 8 to 10% of those referrals for an invasive procedure actually have cancer. So there's a huge amount of testing, cost, capacity that's being used there potentially to tell patients there's nothing abnormal detected, and that's where we feel the real value of GALEAS Bladder fits, that this can be triaged at home very simply, very sensitively, and avoid that kind of capacity burden in the NHS.
Okay, so what evidence has been created so far to justify a change in the pathway?
Okay, so to talk to the evidence that's been generated so far, I guess there's been a chronology of work that's been done. So starting at the top here, the first data points that were generated were from the University of Birmingham. So the collaboration there with Professor Rick Bryant, the Director of Bladder Cancer Research, and focusing on that kind of hematuria, so the symptomatic population that are being referred for suspected bladder cancer. We looked at 700 patients in that retrospective cohort. I think the most exciting data that we've generated in the last 12 to 24 months has been actually real live testing of GALEAS Bladder in the NHS, running this alongside the standard of care to look at the concordance of data between our at-home urine test and the standard of care flexible cystoscopy. We looked at 1,000 patients or 964 patients across a number of NHS trusts. And I'll share that data with you now. I just wanted to point to a third large prospective study that is just finished recruiting, and we anticipate that data also being made available during 2026. So if you look at the sensitivity specificity that we generated from that real world evaluation with the NHS, I guess the take home messages here are that we're showing an extremely high level of sensitivity of 92%. A specificity of also 92%, and importantly in this rule out setting, a negative predictive value of over 99%, so 99.3. And just below I'm showing the literature value of the sensitivity specificity of the incumbent standard of care. So you can see that actually we're outperforming in terms of sensitivity and specificity versus the flexible cystoscopy. So we know that that's a great option for patients. And if you look, I guess the second point really, which is equally as important, we're not just good at finding later stage cancers, but we've been highly sensitive across all stages and grades, whether that's muscle invasive cancer, non-muscle invasive cancer, both low and high grade, and all the different stages within. So I think this has given the NHS real confidence that GALEAS Bladder can make a real difference to pathways. And I guess we're following that kind of model of where there's we're following the model of fit testing, which has proven that actually an at-home non-invasive procedure prior to a more invasive oscopy, if you like, can really remove burden and cost from the system. So that's what we've generated so far.
Jeff, do you want to add anything?
Well, I think that the thing we're often very clear with clinicians on is we're not actually seeking to replace cystoscopy entirely at all, actually. It's just simply moving it into a different stage of the pathway. So the existing tools at clinicians' disposal, which many have become extremely skilled at using, are still as valuable as they ever were. It's just focusing the attention of an invasive visual inspection on the patients that have already been confirmed molecularly to have mutations, cancer mutations found through the GALEAS bladder test. So the pathway, there'll still be elements of visual inspections, which clinicians are often comforted by, but crucially, it should only be on the very small percentage of those that have a positive molecular test first.
Absolutely. I think what's the interesting thing also is that you're addressing the carbon output problem that the NHS is passionate about right now. Less travel, less engagement. I think it's a very important thing to bring to the NHS's attention.
That's right.
Okay, so
statistic on that, Stephen. Actually, we the average journey time during our evaluation with the NHS was 9 kilometres each way. So if you extrapolate that across the 350 or so cystoscopies performed each year, that's over 3 million kilometres of travel that could have been avoided. So if you think about the carbon impact of that, as well as parking, and often, testing is done in pretty rural areas where with an elderly population, which actually find that travel very difficult and often rely on public transportation. So, I think you're right. There's a real social aspect to this as well.
Okay, I think you're going to get some very positive patient feedback and obviously stronger preferences and better compliance. So I think you've actually ticked so many good boxes here. What are the plans to bring the technology to patients in the UK and internationally? And how are you going to do it?
So the UK has been our focus because it's our home market. We've actually already been live in the private sector in the UK for some time. We originally had Bupa reimbursement agreed in late 2024, I think. It seems like a lifetime ago. Bupa were very quick to engage with us, actually. They saw an opportunity for the patient pathway to be improved. So I think it's worth giving them a shout out for their vision on this test, which has been hugely helpful. So we have, a number of the well-known and well-established private clinics in the UK that carry our test, and those that have that at their disposal or have been able to use GALEAS Bladder. But of course, the bulk of the population is tested via the NHS, like myself. So therefore, that's been our main focus to roll out to where most of the patients are in the UK. The idea for international expansion and being able to make it available for patients outside of the UK is the plan is to follow real adoption in the UK first. We want to focus on having this embedded in pathway here within the NHS. So, whilst we're already live in the NHS across a number of early adopter trusts, the NHS is a combination of over 200 trusts, and we're currently either kind of trialing, speaking with, or live with around about 50 of them. So there's many, many, many more that we would like to engage, and many patients that can benefit from this test first. It's also, the NHS, as you know, Steve, is a fantastic data generation machine, as well as being hugely respected internationally. So the idea is we solidify around helping the patient population here during this year and maybe a portion of next. And then we look to take our test internationally. And the first international markets that we're already exploring by talking with key opinion leaders, clinicians, and initial engagement with the regulatory and hospital systems are the United States and a few of the key European countries. So at the moment, we're determining the best way of us reaching patients in those markets. And the idea at the moment is we build the base of evidence here first, so it is overwhelmingly positive, and then we take it to those patients internationally.
Okay, all right. I know you.
The point to add to that really is the strength of the HTA system here in the UK with NICE, and we've already now. So I think through the work we've done and the impact we're making with that early adoption, NICE have now selected urinary biomarkers as a priority topic for review, and we believe that HTA process will further add weight and guidelines to the adoption of obviously urinary biomarkers, but in particular GALEAS Bladder here in the UK. And I think we're talking about the US US and other European countries, I think that NICE badge does hold real weight globally, and we think that will make a huge impact.
Okay, so tell me what's the long-term vision for the bladder test to support patient pathways? Is it primary care positioning? Is it, improving indication for surveillance? What exactly is?
Happy to go first here, Jeff. We've been very focused at the moment where the biggest wealth of our evidence has been generated in that hematuria, so that symptomatic population being referred for suspected cancer. We do believe there's a really strong use case for the monitoring of patients with non-muscle invasive bladder cancer. So these are patients that are diagnosed. We know the recurrence is very high, so over 70% of patients with non-muscle invasive disease will recur after surgery, and so therefore they go on to have a regimen of a routine follow-up flexible cystoscopy. And again, that's a hugely invasive procedure regimen for those patients over a number of years to have regular cystoscopy. And we speak to some patients actually that find that very difficult and end up having to be managed via general anaesthetic or other things in order to be able to have that routine surveillance. So to be able to use a urinary biomarker in that setting can add real value. We also know that the mutational profile of upper tract urothelial cancer is very similar to that of bladder cancer. So the panel that we've developed and the mutations that we're looking for within our panel, we know are highly appropriate for that of upper tract urothelial cancer, which again is a really challenging area to diagnose patients. So we believe there's a really strong use case there, and we're just generating the evidence there as well.
Excellent.
There's the area that we're helping patients at the moment fit into pathway is via secondary care, as Simon mentioned. Eventually, we do see this test sitting in primary care. It would make sense for that to be the case. I mean, the trigger point for a patient entering this pathway is that they have blood in their urine, and that is determined at the primary care stage, at least here in the UK. And then they are referred into secondary care for an invasive procedure, which can only be done in hospital where the equipment and the expertise lies. But with GALEAS Bladder being rolled out, where that you don't need a hospital, you don't need all of the equipment, you simply need to pee in a cup and pop it into a post box. Then actually, long term, we absolutely do see it sitting in primary care, and we can remove that whole administrative burden on hospitals that typically would like to be more focused on acute care. So we're already engaging with primary care and general practitioners in the UK, but I think that pathway may take a little longer to change, purely because of the complexity around kind of rewiring the referrals, but also the kind of financial and reimbursement side and how that system works. But once those challenges are overcome, I think it would be beneficial for the patient if it was simply a test that was referred at the point of hematuria being detected in primary care.
Absolutely. Okay, it's quite transparent, isn't it? So what else are you focusing on to further support patients, clinicians, and improvements in early cancer detection?
Well, so it's probably worth mentioning that the general population of those with found blood in their urine are applicable for GALEAS Bladder, but we're also looking at specific cohorts that are at higher risk. So we've done a great deal of work with professionals in the military, particularly that work near explosives. It was a study that the co-developer of the test, Professor Rick Bryan of the University of Birmingham, recently published, has shown a far higher risk for those professionals of developing bladder cancer. And so we're working with charities and partners in that space to actually define a specific pathway for them, because they have this cohort of professionals that are being asked to do this dangerous work and are facing yet more danger off the back of it that they couldn't previously see or understand. Similarly, we're starting to make inroads with firefighters who have also been found to have greater risk of this due to the proximity to carcinogenic chemicals in their line of work. So there are kind of extensions of GALEAS Bladder, but there's also, we found during the collection of the thousands of the urine samples that we have, that whilst we're able to, of course, very accurately characterize bladder cancer presence, we're also picking up a number of different cancers in urine. So urine as a sample type has huge potential as a very straightforward sample to give, but also contains a rich volume of genetic data from which we could potentially replicate the success that we've had for bladder cancer into other cancer types. So that's actually one of the main focuses of our R&D department at the moment, is characterizing those other cancers that we're finding. We're able to tell clinicians at the moment in urology centers, this patient doesn't have bladder cancer, but we have found cancer present.
Mm-hmm.
And so the development we're doing at the moment is so we can better characterize that and actually say, we haven't just found a cancer, we found the kind of genetic signature of another specific cancer. And so broadening the products and services that we have across the urine sample type, that's one of our main focuses in terms of the next products to come along.
Okay, that's very exciting. I love that. Simon, yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I think that summarizes it perfectly, really. We know there's lots of challenges, particularly within the urology setting. So, as Jeff said, we're able to determine, other cancer types from those samples. I think, beyond that, we as a business, we're mission focused to bring early cancer detection, and there are other areas and other academic collaborations that we work on. With other tumor types, so whether that's women's health, endometrial cancer, or colorectal cancer, these are all academic collaborations where we're able to work to develop evidence and value, that is our mission that we continue to work towards. Really, is innovating pathways and really bringing products that are going to make a real difference to patients.
So, I mean, it's a hugely passionate topic that we're talking about here. The reason that Simon and I are both here actually is because we are mission focused. Simon mentioned, our vision is early cancer testing should be available to absolutely everyone. The technology exists now, as do the logistical capabilities post-COVID to be able to move anything worldwide for relatively low cost. I think the hooks that really stick in my mind are the patient experiences that we get to hear about. And the best recent one that comes to mind was maybe a few weeks back. We were just concluding our real world evaluation, and that was, as Simon mentioned, about 1,000 patients over 7 NHS sites. And occasionally, very occasionally, you would get a result. So this is side by side comparing cystoscopy with GALEAS bladder, and occasionally you would get a result that was discordant, which would mean that the cystoscopy would say there's no cancer present, and our test would say that there is. Mm-hmm. And the clinicians that we were working with, one in particular, Jane Douglas-Moore, who leads the urology in Leicester, she was following up on every single case that was negative from a cystoscopy perspective, but positive from a GALEAS bladder perspective, just to check. This was a non-interventional study, so this was not something that she necessarily needed to do, but she felt that it was her clinical duty, I suppose, to do so. And there were, I think, 3 cases. I can certainly remember 2 off the top of my head, where cancer was actually found the second time a cystoscopy was performed, and as a result, that meant that the patients that normally would have been discharged were fast-tracked through to treatment. Tumors were found, and then the same day removed, and they were cancer-free. I mean, and that is, in terms of the impact that has, and the feeling of reward for everyone here at Nonacus. I mean, it's absolutely enormous. The fact that we've actually managed to change the outcome for these individuals, and every test for us isn't a test. There's a life behind it, and that's the impact that we get to have, and hopefully we get to scale that from a handful of people during that trial that have had positive intervention they wouldn't have, to the hundreds of thousands of people that we can help, first in the UK and then worldwide.
That's excellent. Thank you very much. And Simon?
So, I think that the thing that really drives me here is, I spent the last 2 to 3 years engaging with, such a breadth of different stakeholders within that are involved here. I've spoken to commissioners, to clinicians, to patient groups. I've spoken to cancer alliances, to right the way through the system here, and everybody wins. Everybody sees the value of change here, and so I guess that's really what drives me. I feel it's almost my duty here to bring this through and make this change of a pathway that people so desperately need. I've talked already, without going through it again, the current system is broken, and patients are coming in for a procedure they don't want, to be told that they didn't need to have it in the first place. And actually, clinicians, what they really want is space and time in their day to be able to treat patients effectively, and particularly those patients that need to be in the clinic that do have cancer. So I spent 2 days last weekend with a patient advocate, and they're passionate that they need this product to be brought to market, and they need to have access to it. And like I said, almost I feel that's our duty now to work with the HTA process and the commissioning bodies within the UK to bring this change of pathway through. And actually, everybody's going to benefit if we can do that successfully. So I guess that's what drives me every single day.
I think you're both very engaging human beings. Very passionate people, and this is probably one of the most interesting technologies I've seen for quite some time in terms of diagnostics, and I think you will make an incredible impact on places like the NHS and the EU, and particularly sections of the American healthcare economy. So I think that you've changed lives significantly. So I want to congratulate you and thank you very much for your time today, and wish you all the very best in the future. And let's talk again in maybe 8 to 9 months after you've gotten some work done in the States and the European centres, because I think that will change, and I think that you'll have a far greater geography over the NHS and a far greater impact. And thank you very much for your time today.
Thanks, Steve.
Thanks, Steve. Yeah, really appreciate you having us on. It'll be great to come back if you'd have us in a year or so. We can share more of those patient stories and maybe some of the system stories as well of how everyone's been benefiting. Appreciate it.
That'd be fantastic.